reasons that I'll try and explain without getting emotional. I'll start by reminding you that I think it was either 2 or 3 years ago, to mark Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, we invited Stephanie Moore, the widow of Bobby Moore, former England captain who died from bowel cancer. She came into the studio for an hour and she talked all about bowel cancer and what men needed to do. And a few weeks or months after that programme, I had a series of emails. I mean, I say a series, it was, I think, 3 or 4, from men who had said, because I listened to your programme, I went and got tested. And the test came back positive. And they were all in stage 2. Now, if you're in stage 2, it can be treated. If you're in stage 4, basically, you've had it. And they all said, if I hadn't listened to your programme that night, I would be dead now. Or they thought they would be dead. I mean, I can't say for definite. So we thought we'd do it again today because it is Bowel Cancer Awareness Month. And it was actually sparked by an email to Corey from Kit Bradshaw, who, if you live in the southeast of England, you will know he's an ITV News reporter on Meridian. And he's with me now, and he's going to tell you his story and the story of his husband. And we're then going to take your calls because obviously I'm not a medical person, Kit isn't a medical person, but he's been through the most traumatic times because his husband died of bowel cancer at the age of 31. Kit, welcome. I said to you when you walked in, I wish we'd met under different circumstances. By the way, we are streaming this if you want to watch us both get a bit emotional. Because reading about your story and what's happened to you, it's just so traumatic, and it's traumatic to read it, what it must have been like going through it, supporting Lawrence through that. I can't imagine. Just tell us right from the beginning what happened.
So thank you for having me, Iain. Me and Lawrence have been together a number of years. We met at university down in Brighton. It was actually a dare when we got together. We were at a work Christmas party and someone in the group dared us to kiss, and the rest was history.
I'm sure you couldn't do that nowadays. You'd be drummed out.
But we were together for many years, and we were both living in London at the time, and Lawrence was living with friends. I was actually living back home, training to be a journalist. And Lawrence always had a tendency when he ate or drank to get bloated. That was just part of his makeup, especially when we were on a night out and he was drinking cider. He'd get bloated. But he noticed that things were changing and his bowel habits began to change, and he had some other symptoms he wasn't happy about. So he went to his GP. He was in his late 20s at this point, mid-20s at this point, and he went to his GP for some advice about these symptoms. And the symptoms, as described by Lawrence, because I looked at his Instagram stories from when he was diagnosed just before I came to do this interview, and he described them as bloating, an on-off stitch-like pain in his side, and then the change of bowel habits and spending more time on the toilet, basically. We're going to have to talk about these things in this hour.
And we must, because these are sorts of things that people don't tend to talk about. And it's all a bit yucky, and that's the reason why a lot of men just think, oh, it's too embarrassing. I can't go and see the GP and talk about these things. And they must.
And it's really important we talk about it more openly with just in day-to-day life, with our family and friends. And so we don't have that anxiety about going to our doctor and talking about these kind of things. But unfortunately for Lawrence, his doctor said, you've got irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and sent him away with some Buscopan, tablet symptoms relief for IBS. Lawrence's symptoms actually got worse and his bowel habits were changing again. And so he went back to his GP, and really, really, unfortunately for Lawrence, and this may have cost him the difference between surviving and dying, is his GP, as Lawrence wrote on his Instagram story after his diagnosis, was snarky with him and actually had a go at him for coming back with those same symptoms. And criticised him for taking up the time of coming back to see him. And as Lawrence describes, that really knocked his confidence, because he thought, I'm just imagining this, it's all in my head, and probably waited several more months until we'd actually moved in together in Wandsworth and we'd gone to a different GP practice. He went back to that GP with these same symptoms. And they did the blood test and they did the other tests they can do. And in Lawrence's case, nothing was picked up on those tests, but he was put on a waiting list for a colonoscopy, which is the ultimate test they can do. It's a camera where it needs to go to check things out. Sadly, because Lawrence was in his mid-20s at that point, he wasn't in a high-risk group. He waited 6 months on an NHS, the waiting list, to get that colonoscopy. Obviously, quite an in-depth procedure, and it's understandable, I guess, that there is that kind of waiting list, but waited those 6 months, and they were really agonising 6 months for him. I remember his anxiety levels increasing. He really wasn't happy with the symptoms. He felt they were getting worse. And D-Day, as he described it, was the 20th of March, 2019. He was 27. He and his mum accompanied him up to the colonoscopy appointment. And as soon as the doctor did that procedure, they told him there's definitely a tumour and it's probably cancer. And that was, as Lawrence described D-Day, our whole world fell apart. He was 27. He actually texted me at work and said, "When do you finish today?" At the time, I was doing radio news reading, actually. And I knew immediately something was up. And I called him and I just knew that, and he told me in what he could through tears on the phone. And I just told my boss I need to go home and went straight home. And as a partner, you're always trying to reassure your other half. And one regret I have is that when Lawrence was getting more and more concerned about these symptoms, as a partner, you don't want to be the one saying, "Yeah, it is a bit worrying, actually." I did do a bit of a Google, because we all know whatever you Google, it seems to come back cancer. Yeah. And you don't want to be that partner. But so I tried to relieve his stress over those 6 months waiting for that colonoscopy and tried to put his mind at rest as best I could. And then we were into meetings with consultants, and Lawrence was a stage 3 bowel cancer at that stage, colorectal cancer.
What does that mean, stage 3?
So it means, my understanding of the NHS jargon is, it means it is advanced. It was a late diagnosis, but it wasn't stage 4 at the stage where you are never going to be cancer-free. So it was still at the stage where they could look at treatment. And for Lawrence, what that meant was surgery within 4 weeks, pretty major surgery to remove a large section of Lawrence's bowels, and create an ileostomy, I think is the right pronunciation. So we had a stoma bag fitted that people may be aware of. There's been a lot more awareness of stomas and the bags that people wear. And then he had to go, in the months after that surgery, he went for chemotherapy and then some radiotherapy as well. And several months after that, he actually got the no evidence of disease, is what they call it now, rather than the all clear. But, we can't detect any cancer. And for several months, so 2019, he was diagnosed. And for several, for a period in the middle of COVID and all the years blur into one, he was cancer-free as far as we were aware. And he actually, just before the pandemic, he had that stoma removed. So he had the surgery and his bowels were back to normal, and that was a big step as well, because we'd had all those years, that time of dealing with the stoma bag. We named her Sally, the stoma, because the nurses told us that that's the best way to give the stoma a name. Yeah, I'm
not even going to ask why Sally. But
Lawrence liked naming, coming up with silly names for things. He was a really kind, generous man, but he was very silly. And actually, at his funeral, I wrote a poem called "Silliness," because that was him. And Sally Stoma fitted that silliness and his character completely. So we said goodbye to Sally Stoma, and the bowels were reconnected. But later that year, it was February 2021 when after you have cancer, you have routine blood tests, and the cancer had returned. And sadly, for Lawrence, it had gone to his bone then. There was cancer in his spine, and once it's in your bone, it's, for Lawrence anyway, it's not curable. He was going to live with cancer. And sadly for Lawrence, from that moment on, it seemed every chemotherapy or targeted radiotherapy that they threw at Lawrence didn't work, and it wasn't responding. We were getting to the end of the road as far as treatments go. And despite bowel cancer being the second biggest killer in terms of cancers in this country, it doesn't have as many treatment options as a lot of other cancers. So Lawrence exhausted, the list quite quickly, and actually shared advice with Dame Deborah James over Instagram about the drugs he was on and the cocktail of drugs they were giving him at the Royal Marsden to try and extend his life. And we brought our wedding forward. We delayed it for a year because of COVID. And Lawrence said, I think we should bring this forward. And we got married in October 2021. And that was amazing. And, the best day of my life, and always will be. And 250 days later, in June last year, Lawrence passed away. And that was, the worst day of my life, and always will be, I think. And he was 31, and he was an amazing husband and boyfriend for 9.5 years, husband for 250 days, but he'll always be my husband. I'm still wearing my wedding ring now. I've got a photo here in the studio of us two on our wedding car in October 21, and I'll always love him, and his family will always love him, and all his friends will always love him.
Did you talk about it a lot, or was it that thing in the background that often he didn't want to talk about it, you didn't want to talk about it because obviously it might upset him? How did you cope with all of that?
I think both of our ways of coping was to just try and get on with normal life as much as possible, keep things as normal as possible. And so actually the times we did talk about it head on were really few and far between, because that definitely helped Lawrence cope with everything that was happening, especially with everything else that was happening in the world over that time, because it was pandemic, it was lockdowns.
But right at the beginning, when he had those symptoms and didn't really know what it was, were you constantly on his back to take it further, or did you sort of?
Yeah. I
mean, I get the feeling from what you said a moment ago that you kind of think maybe you should have been more.
I think I should. Yeah. I think Lawrence was assertive, but in hindsight, we often, I think, try and put our loved ones' minds at rest, and that's, I think, what I was trying to do. I never dissuaded him from going to see his GP, and actually when he was saying it was IBS, I remember I was having chats about that and saying, I don't think this is IBS, is it? Because none of the your IBS medication you're taking is doing anything, and things are getting worse, and you're spending more and more time on the toilet. And for Lawrence, the change of bowel, we use pseudonyms like change of bowel habits. For Lawrence, it meant having a sensation when he was going to the toilet of not emptying his bowels and not being able to, and spending longer and longer. So he needed to get that, and I, in hindsight, I should have probably been more assertive. And one of the issues is there's an association with bowel cancer as being an older person's disease. But charities have, in recent years, run campaigns never too young, because younger and younger people, young people do get bowel cancer. They're not part of the national screening programs because it is statistically an older person's disease, but it means it's even more important because you're not doing those routine tests. If you have any of the symptoms of the 5 main bowel cancer symptoms, to go to your GP and really to be quite assertive, and if you're not happy, to get a second opinion or to go back.
Absolutely. And of course, I turned 60 last year, so I got the free test. But even though I'm well aware of all of this, it took me 3 months to send it back. And I'm thinking, looking back, what an idiot. Now it came back clear. But I wonder what the percentage rate is of people not sending them back at all. I've got no idea. But as you say, it is seen as predominantly a male condition, although I've got a text here from somebody who says, please, dear Iain, please can it be acknowledged that bowel cancer affects both men and women? It's not predominantly a male. Well, see, you probably know better than I do, but I've always thought it was predominantly a male issue, but of course women do get it too.
Oh, absolutely. No, I don't. I don't have the stats breakdown, but of course, Bowel Babe Dame Deborah. There are many high-profile people women who've had.
And Andy says approximately 4.4% of men, 1 in 23, and 4.1% of women, 1 in 25, will be diagnosed with colorectal cancer in their lifetime. Lifetime risk is similar in men and women, despite higher incidence rates in men, because women have longer life expectancy. Well, that's something I didn't know. Thank you very much indeed for that, Andy. We'll take a break now, but we'll come back to hear more from Kit in just a moment, and we'll take some of your calls too. 0345 6060 973. If you are a man who you've listened to Kit talk about Lawrence and you think, well, actually, one or two of those symptoms, I feel that maybe I should look into this. I mean, do give us a call. I'm sure Kit will be happy to talk to you about it. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
A text here. My wife died at 41 with breast cancer. Her outcomes compromised by lazy, negligent, disinterested GPs fobbing her off 5 years earlier when she presented with classic symptoms. GPs are a lottery, luck of the draw, some good, some bad. I mean, I do want to say here that I mean, obviously your experience, Lawrence's experience with his first GP fits into that narrative, but I don't want people to walk away with the impression that all GPs know nothing about this and will give false diagnoses. A general practitioner is just that. They're not specialists, but they refer people to specialists. And I mean, the treatment that Lawrence clearly had on the second visit would be, I'm sure every GP would say, or hopefully every GP would say, that was unacceptable. Kit Bradshaw is with us, who is an ITV News journalist and bowel cancer awareness campaigner. I mean, you're obviously doing this programme with me now. You're clearly comfortable about talking about it, which I think is a fantastic thing to do, because you could easily sort of hide away and not talk about it to anybody. And I suspect that when people are in this situation, that's the first instinct, that, well, I just don't want to deal with the world. but you've come out to do this. What's motivated you to do it?
Lawrence was quite a private person, and for many months after his initial diagnosis, he didn't post anything on social media. And he told his friends privately, but he wasn't sort of live blogging his surgery and all those kind of things. But that changed as his cancer journey, if you want to call it that, went on. And he saw what other people were doing to raise awareness. And he did start posting about his treatment and the amazing work of so many staff at the hospitals he got treated at, and the aftercare that he got as well. And so he did try to raise awareness of his late diagnosis, of the symptoms. And even as things were sort of at their worst stage, where there wasn't any treatment left for Lawrence and he was passed into the care of the hospice team, he did still want to raise awareness. And he encouraged me and my sister last year to run the Brighton Marathon to raise money for Bowel Cancer UK. And he left a letter to his family and friends, and he wasn't actually well enough in the last few weeks of his life to write that letter, but he told me that it was on his phone. And classic Lawrence, he was the organiser, and he left a to-do list for us. One was to always water his house plants and to make sure they survived. There were some other things to do, but one of them was to, as a family and friends, to try to raise awareness and money for cancer charities as well, but also to raise awareness because, as he said in that letter, people living with cancer deserve it, and we could save lives, because that's ultimately what it's about. What I would hate people listening to do would be to get anxious or fearful. This isn't about, spreading stress or anxiety, because a lot of bowel cancer symptoms can be other things. Yeah. It's not saying this is bowel cancer. All it's saying is don't ignore it, and take it upon yourself to not ignore if you have bowel cancer symptoms, and to go and get them checked out by your GP, because the worst thing that you can do is ignore this issue. And so, yeah, that's what's motivated me to try and encourage others, because Lawrence would want that. And if anything can come about out of what happened to Lawrence, it would be that other people can get checked, because the earlier you're diagnosed, bowel cancer is treatable, and there are treatments. There's lots of treatments for it, but like with so many cancers, the earlier you're diagnosed, your outcomes and your chance of survival really goes through the roof.
Lots of really lovely text coming in here. This is one saying, "I've just woken up." Okay. And put the radio on. "I don't know who you are, but thank you for sharing what is such a painful and emotional experience. I'm sat in the dark in tears." Put the lights on, and the tears will go away. Well, it's Kit Bradshaw, who's an ITV news journalist, that we're talking to about his experience, about the experience of his husband Lawrence, who sadly died last year. Was last year, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Do you want to get
No,
that
it
wrong?
was. It was.
I think we should go to some calls. James is in Hoddesdon. Hello, James.
Good evening, Ian, and good evening, Kit. And Kit, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I can see how and hear how raw, obviously, this is, which is, it's going to be. I lost both my parents to cancer, my father to a rare form of thyroid cancer. My mother had bowel cancer twice. It wasn't actually bowel cancer that killed her in the end, but you have covered some of the things that I was going to say. I was diagnosed with a bowel condition 13 years ago, and that condition recently has metamorphosized into something else. It's now inflammatory bowel disease, and it is absolutely the case that there are so many bowel conditions that all seem to have very similar symptoms, and a lot of those symptoms do mimic the symptoms of cancer. And I just want to touch, if I can, on this area with GPs. I've also had the same experience, and I would say to anyone listening, Ian, you mentioned it, GP, general practitioner, they don't have a specialism in, some of them do, but that's why we have consultants, gastroenterologists, people like that, because that's what they devote their specialism to. And I had to ask for a second opinion 13 years ago because I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and through my own research I didn't think that that's what I had, so I got a second opinion, and sure enough the second consultants gave me a different diagnosis. But my symptoms have now changed recently, and I'm sort of actually in a period of waiting in anticipation to get the results back, from certain tests. But because I've been dealing with this for so long, and I've spoken to many people, and it's brilliant that someone who suffered the loss that you have is sort of talking about it on a national platform, because unfortunately men just don't talk, about their health in the way that, females do. And it's something that we really need to sort of get on the bike and pedal a bit faster to catch up, because there are so many men every year losing their lives through ignorance and embarrassment. And it's the same with prostate, cancer. Yeah. Prostate cancer is one of the most treatable cancers there are. Having to have the rectal examination is the thing that puts most men off going to the GP. And I would just echo what you have said. If you've got any type of niggles going on in that part of your body, in the bowel, that you absolutely shouldn't ignore it. And if you do get fobbed off, because one of the problems that GPs tend to do is, if you present like your husband did at an age where bowel cancer is just not recognised in that age group, you will more likely than not be told that you've got IBS. But it's not a one size fits all, and unfortunately, as you've experienced with your husband, if things are not caught in a timely fashion, the outcome can be horrendous, whereby if the GP takes the symptoms seriously, because to me there's nothing lost in them referring you on to a specialist, and if it turns out that there isn't anything untoward going, okay, great. But if you don't get referred on, and then it turns out that 6 months, a year went by where nothing was happening intervention-wise, and then it turns out that you have got cancer, you can't get those months back, no. And the treatment that you could have received is probably not applicable then.
And I think that's why it's so important, not just to raise awareness amongst us all about the bowel cancer symptoms, but it's also about raising awareness for GPs and medical professionals as well, not to pigeonhole people as, right, they're under 50, it's probably not bowel cancer, it's probably IBS. GPs do an incredible and really hard job, the amount of conditions and things they must see, especially at the moment, the amount of appointments they're dealing with. But yeah, it's about raising awareness amongst everyone of these symptoms and the fact that it hopefully isn't cancer. But why not? Let's just do the tests. Let's not just say it's just IBS. It's just some kind of irritable bowel thing. Take these over-the-counter medications and try and ignore it, because we all need to just get checked to make sure it's not bowel cancer. And it just puts your mind so much at risk, because if the symptoms are being made worse because of your stress and anxiety that it might be cancer, actually having those tests and getting that negative result sets your mind at rest and might even help your symptoms as well.
James, thank you very much. Great call. We'll take more of your calls in just a moment, and we'll hear more from Kit Bradshaw. It's 8:31 on LBC. News headlines with Daryl Jackson.
A man suspected of leaking US military documents has been arrested by the FBI. Jack Teixeira, a 21-year-old National Guardsman, is said to have overseen a private online group. The information is reportedly linked to Ukraine. Well, President Biden, who earlier said he was concerned about the leaks, has addressed the Irish Parliament. He said the precious peace established following the Good Friday Agreement needs to be nurtured. And Scotland's new First Minister says he wished he'd known details of the investigation into his party's finances earlier. Hamza Yousaf says he had no idea about a £100,000 motorhome police found at an address linked to former Chief Executive Peter Murrell. LBC weather: showers easing in the south tonight, but some continuing further north. Rain arriving for the southwest in the early hours and a low of freezing.
LBC.
On it's 8:35 on LBC. We have Kit Bradshaw with us, ITV News journalist and bowel cancer awareness campaigner. We're taking your calls. Interesting text here from someone who says, I have symptoms. I'm 33. I haven't been to a GP for years and I've moved away. Where can I go if no GP? Well, you could register where you are locally. But if you've got symptoms, I would strongly suggest that you go and see a private GP if it's difficult to register where you are, which will cost you probably about £100. But given that it could be a life-saving visit, I would say that was probably money well spent. Good.
Yeah, I mean, register with your GP. If you've got a local GP, just try and get in that system, because don't delay it any further, because the GP is just that initial consultation where they can talk through your symptoms, discuss what they think might be wrong with you, and at least then you're in the system and going to get tests. I mean, I've got friends who had similar concerns about their symptoms, and they've people can go different routes. If I know people who've got private medical insurance and they've gone through that route to get tests to put their mind at risk. But for most of us, going to your GP is that first port of call.
Yeah. Right, let's go to some more calls. Sian is in Bletchingley. Hello, Sian.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Kit.
Hello.
First, I'd like to start with my sincere sorrow for you and others in a similar situation. But I would like to explain that in March this year, I had symptoms. I went to my NHS GP. When I was with her, she did the bowel screening kit, the examination and a referral. 4 weeks later, my symptoms were worrying me. They hadn't particularly changed, but they were worrying me. I phoned the surgery, and so this is now in April this year, so just 2 weeks ago. I phoned on a Tuesday. She made the referral into urgent. The hospital phoned me on Wednesday. On Saturday, I had the endoscopy. On Monday, I had the colonoscopy, and that ruled out both the tests to say there was no cancer.
Well, that is actually really encouraging to hear, isn't it, Kit?
Yeah, and what a relief that must be for you as well to have got that result back.
And the other thing is, Kit, which was absolutely astounding, if people want to know this, in my NHS hospital, for both of those tests, both of those procedures, they send you away with a booklet, and in the booklet is the consultation note. You don't have to go back, you don't have to ring your GP. You come away with a booklet, and in the booklet there is a picture of sort of your system, and it shows exactly the areas that they targeted and what they did, and has the consultant's recommendations. And you walk out with that. As soon as your sort of mild anaesthesia is worn off, you walk out with that in your hand.
Well,
and you're done.
And Sian, this is how it should operate all over the country, isn't it? And if it did, I suspect that there would be a lot more people alive today than there are that have survived bowel cancer. Thank you very much. Because I think, as I said before, it is important that people don't run away with the impression that the whole system it just doesn't work and that all GPs don't really understand it. Well, Sian's experience shows that that's not right.
It's a fantastic experience that she was able to get those tests so quickly.
Exactly. Kieran says, I'm a GP trainee, and one of the biggest recent changes in the area of bowel disease screening has been the FIT test, or FIT test, I don't know which one, which looks for small amounts of blood in the stool. It's very sensitive for picking up serious bowel conditions. Therefore, if you have a negative test, you have a more than 99% chance that it isn't cancer, a polyp, or inflammatory bowel disease. This option wasn't available to GPs until recently, so they had to manage patients according to data on at-risk patients. That's not to excuse any bad practice, but just to put things into context. It's not an easy job, but in this area we now have a very good test that can reassure us and patients. Let's go to Jim in New Malden. Hi, Jim.
Hi, good evening, Ian. My condolences. Is it Kit?
Kit, yes.
Kit.
Hello.
I sort of kind of a closer story to yours. I lost a friend. Never goes away. We were in the 20s. I'm in my mid-50s now. And the point I want to raise has been addressed by a few people. His GP ignored him for a long time, said it was just stomach ache. He got banned from 2 hospitals, saying he was an hypochondriac. It was just he was ignored. I don't know if things are still the same now. And by the time he realized that something was really bad, it was too late. He was 23. It's 30 years ago this year. And, your story just reminded me of the same thing. And I just hope that people assist, if GPs as serious as they want them to be, try something else. We were all young at the time in our 20s. And all of us feel guilty because we thought that he was maybe just complaining too much and there was nothing. And then when it did, it was too late. So I'll just like to say to people, if you think something's wrong, just keep pushing. Just keep pushing. We'll never know. Maybe it was never going to be cured. Back then, maybe we don't know, but we live with that guilt.
Yeah.
Like we wish we did more. It's 30 years this year, but it's
still with you, isn't it? It's still with you.
Yeah, because we were so young and we thought we were never going to die. And that's. I mean, there's so many tests now. It's so different. Back in 1992, it was a whole different world. But my condolences for your loss. The reason why it resonated was just because you said that he was 25 or so when it all started. We were in the early 20s, and but that's the thing. Just that people should not take no for an answer and keep pushing. Just keep pushing.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much. Lots and lots of calls coming in. Mick is in County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. Hello, Mick.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
What I was saying to your researcher, how you produce a guy, I don't understand why general practitioners and people at the front end who have the patients coming to them presenting with the symptoms, I don't understand why they don't go and look immediately for the more sinister answer. My brother was fobbed off for months with having gallstones, and they're only gallstones, and take some tablets and they'll pass and they'll dissolve and they'll do this, and by the time they actually got him into testing for anything, he had pancreatic cancer and he was dead in 11 weeks. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't know if it's a cost thing because it costs to put people through these tests. So I really, 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 and at the moment I'm still extremely angry at the fact that, I don't know, I understand that pancreatic cancer is a really, really devastating cancer, and I don't know if he would have, if he'd caught it earlier, been any better or any worse, but it seemed to me like people were just happy enough to say, you've just got gallstones, son, you'll be fine.
Well, Mick, it's an interesting question. I don't think Kit and I can really respond to this. If there are any GPs listening who'd like to give us a call and explain how you... I mean, I can't really imagine that it's done on the balance of probabilities, but I just don't know. So if there's any GPs listening who would like to sort of shed any light on that, do give us a call. Let's go to Owen in Durham. Hello, Owen.
Hi, you all right? Nice to speak to you both. Basically, I'm just kind of ringing in because obviously I had a very similar experience to Kit's husband. Obviously, I'd been going to the doctors complaining about pain, unusual toilet habits. I was rapidly losing weight. And obviously, I was told it was IBS. It's nothing. There's no problem. There's some Buscopan on your go. And basically, I must have gone through that for about 18 months. And then eventually I'd gone to the A&E because I had a chronic pain in my abdomen. And they went to do surgery. And that's when they found the tumours. They spread from the bowel into the intestine. And obviously when they found them there, that's how it was discovered. But obviously I'd gone to the doctors for months and they said, it's fine. So I had all that. I had some chemotherapy, I had a ileostomy bag put in, and then had that removed at the end of 2019. And then everything was fine. I was about to start some radiotherapy, and then obviously the lockdown came. And then obviously in lockdown, obviously things had started to move again. And obviously it's back now. It's now stage 4, but luckily it's not in my bones or anything. So I'm all right. We can't just keep zapping the tumours as they pop up.
And that 18 months that you describe, Owen, was a similar time period for Lawrence of going to his doctor and being told it was IBS. Did you get any tests before you ended up in A&E? Were you on a waiting list for a colonoscopy?
Obviously, no. So every time I went to the doctor, and I did to him, like, look, I've got this pain. I'm on the toilet for hours at a time sometimes, and basically they just kept saying, no, like, there's nothing to worry about. Your age, it's IBS. That's all it can be. At your age.
How old were you when you were eventually diagnosed?
27.
Oh, God, that is the same age as Lawrence. And you've had the treatment. I'm so sorry it's come back, but it sounds like you're getting treatment.
Yeah, well, this is like, this is the other point I want to make, kind of like, essentially, like, we're getting lucky every day, obviously, so it's because of the treatments I've had that I'm kind of where I am now, like, so, yes, I'm living with it, but it's not any major danger, but like stuff like, so for example, like a drug I take now didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That is interesting, isn't it? The advances. I mean, we heard there from the trainee GP about the different things that GPs have now got. So, I don't know what the sort of bowel cancer death rate has been or what it is now, but you would like to think that if there's a graph that it's going to be dipping over the next few years.
I know they are funding a lot of research into bowel cancer amongst younger people as well, because that's been an under-researched area, as I understand it, historically, and more research is being funded into that, and hopefully it's allowing more drugs to come on the market. Ian, can I just go through the symptoms? I know we've spoken about Lawrence's symptoms, but just to the 5 symptoms that are, as Bowel Cancer UK lists them, it's really important, and because it's Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, they're talking about it as the high 5 that you really need to know, and we've spoken about most of these, but the 5 common symptoms of bowel cancer are: number 1, bleeding from your bum or blood in your poo. We've spoken about that. Number 2, a persistent and unexplained change in bowel habits. Both Lawrence had that, and I think Owen just described that as well.
And he said he could be on the loo for hours.
Yeah, and that's how Lawrence was when he was waiting for that in that 6 months. I remember him being, it might not have been hours, but it definitely felt like hours when I was in the other room.
Probably did to him as well.
I bet it did. Number 3 is unexplained weight loss, and that was just mentioned. That's not a symptom Lawrence had, but again, these are all symptoms to think about. Number 4, extreme tiredness for no obvious reason. And the 5th one that's been mentioned by a few of the callers is a pain or lump in your tummy, which might go together with some of those symptoms. So it's any of those symptoms are the ones to look out for. And what's really important to stress, which probably touches on what a lot of the callers have mentioned about why don't GPs look for the worst thing, is that most people with any one of those 5 symptoms won't have bowel cancer. But it's getting them checked that's the most important, because they can be so many other things.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. A GP has texted in to say, I see 3 or 4 patients with these symptoms every day.
Yeah.
If we referred all of them for hospital investigation, the system would be flooded quickly, and those with cancer would end up waiting longer for investigation and diagnosis. No system is perfect, and we're being increasingly taught about bowel cancer in younger patients.
Which is really important, and raising that awareness amongst GPs that it does affect younger people is so important. And that's why it's important too, to, if the symptoms persist, to go back to your GP and not to wait too long.
More of your calls, more from Kit in just a moment. It's 8:49 on LBC.
LBC.
talking about bowel cancer. Let's go to Richard in Bridgend. Richard, I asked GPs to call in, and you are one, I gather.
Yeah, for my sins, Iain. Thanks for having me on. And once again, great programme, Kit. Fantastic you're doing this, and I'm so sorry for your loss. There was just a few points I wanted to make and give the side from my point of view. We're talking about GPs as if they're not human beings, but we are, I assure you. We have the highest professional standards. We have to appraise every year. I have to revalidate my license every 5 years. I went through a stringent training over 11 years in total in South Wales to become a general practitioner. So this idea that we're not kind of we are generalists, but at the end of the day, we have to be held to the highest professional standards, and we must be the ones spotting these cancers. The specialists aren't there on the front line; they're the second line, and they're less responsible for spotting them. So, general practice is its own speciality in spotting cancers, and we have to hold GPs, to account for that. My second point would be that there are quite clear guidelines on which we refer. We use the NICE guidelines locally where I work, and they give quite clear guidance on symptoms and how to refer those symptoms and how urgently to refer those symptoms. Now, unfortunately, if a patient under 55 presents with change in bowel habit and none of those other symptoms, I can refer him as urgent suspected cancer, but this can often be downgraded based on national guidelines. So there are nuances to understand there as well. But what Kit said earlier about being persistent and clear in your concerns is so important. I see sometimes 40, 45 patients a day. Some of them more concise in the history they give me than others. And when you present to your doctor, if you can just really outline your concern, your specific concern, I think that's really helpful in getting accurate diagnosis or reassurance as well.
And Richard, this wasn't an issue for Lawrence when he was going to his GP, but I think it's almost especially important now when in many parts of the country lots of people are struggling to get GP appointments, that people don't just think, oh, I can't get an appointment, so I'll put it off. And actually, because some of these symptoms are quite easy to dismiss, it's even more important that people do get that appointment booked in and do go to their GP. And like you say, Richard, are very clear in that time-limited appointment to get across what their symptoms are and whether they've changed or they're getting worse and how long they've been there. Would you agree?
Definitely. And first of all, it's down to the doctor to elicit all that, and the responsibility is purely on me for that. But certainly if you can be clear with your concerns, I think I'm worried about cancer, for example, that can be really helpful, and I can address that quite directly.
Yeah.
In terms of appointments, super difficult. I promise you, there's a lot of hard work going on, and recruitment is a struggle also. What I'd say, there's always one GP on call during the working hours of 8 till 6:30. If it's urgent and you feel it's urgent, simply state that, and you should always get an on-call duty doctor ringing you back. That's certainly how it works in our surgery. If a patient feels their issue is urgent for today, we'll ring them back, and that's where the kind of being assertive comes into it again. We're dealing with an under pressure NHS, so a little bit of responsibility goes back to the patient to show assertiveness, and that's why these kind of programs empower people to do that.
Richard, thank you so much for calling in. I want to squeeze in Shanaz in Croydon before we have to finish at 9. Shanaz, tell us your story.
So my mum's, this is about my mum. She's 73 years old. It started off with just vomiting, diarrhea, and it went on for about 3 or 4 days. So I thought, let me just take her to A&E in Croydon, University Hospital, and in a space of 7 days, I did 5 visits in A&E, and they kept on sending her back with anti-sickness pills, or they'd put her on, fluids and this and that. And then eventually I took her to a different hospital. and they picked it up straight away with her bloods. And they did exactly the same thing that Croydon was doing. They admitted her in straight away, had a CT scan. She had a large tumour in her large bowel and several other tumours. They told us that they couldn't operate. And because she hadn't eaten for about 3 weeks, she'd become very weak over this time. And they said she couldn't have chemotherapy, she couldn't have any treatment. And now I just literally left my mum at the hospital, and we're bringing her home tomorrow for palliative care.
I'm so sorry, Shanaz.
And this has all happened within 5 weeks.
And it's so difficult to cope with, isn't it, when it's happened so quickly?
Yeah, but I would say in the last few months, Mum hasn't been very well, and I have been taking her to the doctors several times, loads of blood tests. I mentioned that she had loss of appetite, and they said it's because of her age, or there was always some excuse or something.
Yeah, I think I'm so sorry for what's happened to your mum, and it just shows that bowel cancer affects people any age, any gender, and can come at any time of your life. But it's so important to go to, as it sounds like you have, to go to the doctors and to try and get them investigated. But I'm so sorry that's the outcome that they've discovered.
But I'm really glad to hear that you're bringing her home for palliative care, because I think that I did that, or my sisters and I did that for my mother at the end of her life, and we had terrible issues with the care that she had had. But the one thing that we look back on is thinking, well, at least we brought her home so she could die in her own bed. And it's no consolation, Shanaz, for any of what's gone on, but you are absolutely doing the right thing. Thank you very much. Andre in Battersea says, great program tonight in on bowel cancer. Kit has been very informative and will definitely raise more awareness for men, which has been the whole point of the hour.
I hope so. Well, and that's why I wanted to do this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming in, because it can't be easy to do this sort of thing, given that it must still be very, very raw. So thank you very much indeed for that. Now, just to tell you that NHS bowel screening kits are available to everyone aged between 60 and 74, free of charge. And you'll be able to find out if you've still got any queries. There are presumably lots of bowel cancer campaign groups that you can find on the internet.
Absolutely. There's loads of resources online. It's Bowel Cancer Awareness Month. Bowel Cancer UK has lots of information on their website. There's lots of really good information on the NHS website. And those free screening kits, like you mentioned, Ian, in some parts of the UK, there's younger ages as well. So I think in Scotland, it's over 50s, in Wales, 55. So look out for them. Don't ignore them. If you get one of those kits in the post, do the test and send it back. And yeah, and it's all about saving lives, and that's why I'm doing this for my husband and for Lawrence and for everyone else out there.
Thank you very much indeed. Lawrence would be proud of you.
Thank you.
Now, coming up, I've lasted the whole hour. Now I'm going to go. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to turn our attention to renting, because there's fierce competition amongst tenants chasing a limited number of homes to rent. And that trend shows no signs of abating. One agent has said the rental market in his area was frenzied as tenants try to secure the few available properties. Well, why are there so few properties available? Is it because landlords are leaving the private rental sector? And if so, why? What experiences have you had in chasing a property? I've heard anecdotes from estate agents that I know where they have 60, 70, 80, 90 people chasing one flat in London. It may be similar over the rest of the UK. Let's find out.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, a 21-year-old National Guardsman has been arrested over the leaking of classified US documents relating to the war in Ukraine. Jack Teixeira is a member of the intelligence wing of the Massachusetts Air National Guard. His Pentagon spokesman, Brigadier General Pat Ryder.
We have rules in place. Each of us signs a non-disclosure agreement. Anybody that